Survival's no theory? You need this. World War II's ultimate survival tool? Not a weapon, bunker, or slick escape. Nope, it was something super quiet, super ordinary. Today, you'd walk right past it, but it kept families alive. Power out, fuel gone, supply chains, poof. Understand it? You'll snag an instant, useful skill, even in your fancy modern home. Okay, imagine 1943, a winter night. Wind whistles through an old farmhouse. Kitchen shelves are looking sparse. Those weekly ration coupons? They're not stretching like last month. A single lamp flickers. Not for ambiance, mind you. Electricity's been dodgy for weeks. Down in the pantry, grain sacks sit untouched. Not forgotten, but those calories are stuck behind. A problem nobody talks about. And that's where real survival kicks in. Forget fancy gear. It's the quiet, my life depends realization. Tools free from grids, engines, or fuel deliveries. Tools that work when you do, turning scarcity into certainty. Today, we rediscover one. 2. Context. War trashed every system families relied on. To get why it mattered, you got to step into the 1940s, where today's systems were flimsy or non-existent. Atlantic supply ships? Sunk without a peep. Freight trains went military, leaving civilian goods weeks late. Coal yards ran dry because fuel was diverted to factories. And in many rural regions, especially in North America, electricity still hadn't reached the average farmhouse. Even in cities, blackouts became routine. Families cooked by candlelight and heated water over wood stoves because modern infrastructure was stretched past its limits. Food once taken for granted became unpredictable, not because people were lazy or unprepared, but because global logistics had simply collapsed under the weight of war. When the system goes down, you suddenly discover that everything you thought was normal. Life was actually a fragile chain held together by millions of moving parts. And the moment even a few of those parts fail, basic survival shifts back onto your shoulders. That's why wartime families didn't wait for rescue. They built resilience into their daily routines. They trusted tools that didn't need electricity, parts, or fuel, tools that worked just as reliably in freezing barns and blackout kitchens as they did on a sunny day. And at the center of that resilience was a device so fundamental that without it, thousands of rural households simply would not have made it through the hardest years of the war. 3. The core problem everyone faced: calories that were locked away during World War II. Governments around the world encouraged families to store whole grains rather than flour. Whole grains last longer, resist insects better, and stay stable through humidity changes. They are one of the safest forms of long-term food security humanity has ever relied on. But there was a problem. One so simple that most modern people forget it entirely. Whole grain cannot feed you unless you can process it. You can have a year's worth of calories sitting safely in sacks, and yet you cannot turn any of it into bread, porridge, or animal feed without breaking each kernel down. That's why historians often refer to whole grain as stored energy, or more accurately, locked energy. It's packed with winter survival nutrients, but utterly useless if you can't access it daily. This wasn't a minor hiccup. Town mills were swamped. They were underpowered, shut down, and electric grinders, practically mythical. Grid down, they were dead weight. Even handheld pestles were agonizingly slow. Families craved something faster, tougher, and built for everyday grind. Without it, their food supply was just an inedible promise. That's why the tool we're about to explore wasn't just handy, it was non-negotiable. It unlocked grain, the one resource everyone could still count on, and by doing so, it became the beating heart of the wartime kitchen economy. The tool? A hand-cranked grain mill. Not a gadget, but vital infrastructure. Now, with the stage set, let's finally shine a spotlight on our hero. In thousands of wartime kitchens, from Kansas plains to rural French bomb shelters, one device was bolted down. A windowsill, or even a feed bin's edge. It wasn't shiny, nor was it modern. In fact, it looked painfully ordinary. But it was the sole tool that transformed raw survival into a daily, livable routine. The hand-cranked grain mill. To modernize, it seems utterly primitive, almost laughably simple. A cast-iron frame, a turning handle, two steel burrs grinding away. But during World War II, it was far more than a mere tool. It was infrastructure. A self-contained food processing system powered entirely by human effort. Its genius lay in its simplicity. No motor to burn out, no belts to snap, no wiring to fry during a blackout. Perfect. Every handle rotation instantly delivered something families could use. Coarse for your breakfast, medium for their munchies, even fine flour for bread. This one machine did it all. Its designers knew a trick modern makers often miss. Survival tools. Many uses or useless. Wartime families got it. When all else failed, the mill didn't. No parts required. No fuel, no grid. Just time, grain, and your own two hands. Absolutely priceless. Talk about craftsmanship. Built when failure wasn't an option. To get these mills, grasp their philosophy. Grasp their philosophy. They emerged from the Great Depression's end, refined in World War II, forged by makers who couldn't afford weak builds. Weak gear? Not an option. Shortages, rationed metals, strained factories. Every product had to last years, often decades. No replacements. Hence, thick vibration-absorbing iron bodies. Tap it. Hear that dull, a confident thunk when tapped. Pure density, no hollow shortcuts. Burrs? Hardened steel, shaped for consistent cuts, not just speed. Even the adjustment screw held firm. Hours of grinding? No problem. No drifting. But the true genius? Every surface, basic tools, easy take apart. One family could clean, repair, or realign it. No tech calls needed. No sealed motors. No proprietary parts. No fragile bits in plastic cases. Wartime designers assumed you'd be your own mechanic. A truly durable philosophy. Transparent, repairable, is something the modern world desperately needs to rediscover. Because a tool that can be fully understood by touch alone is a tool that stays with your family for generations. 6. The versatility families relied on, turning more than just wheat into meals. While many people today imagine these meals were only for wheat, the truth is far more impressive. Wartime kitchens rarely had the luxury of sticking to one grain, and families learned to use whatever the land, the garden, or the ration depot could provide. A hand-cranked mill didn't just make flour. It turned corn into hearty meal for both bread and livestock. It cracked barley and rye into nutrient-dense cereal. It ground oats for warm morning porridge when shortages grew worse. Families pushed even further, turning dried peas, chickpeas, beans, roasted roots, and even acorns into usable meals. Each ingredient required a different texture, and the mill delivered all of them. A simple twist adjusted the gap between the steel burrs, transforming a single tool into a universal food processor long before that phrase existed. This versatility wasn't a luxury, it was survival. When the shelves were empty, families turned to their gardens, fields, and forests. And the mill transformed whatever they gathered into the calories they needed. For many households, it became more than equipment. It became a promise. As long as we have grain and this mill, we can eat tomorrow. 7. The complete survival system built around the mill. To understand just how crucial this tool was, you have to picture the entire wartime food ecosystem built around it. In thousands of rural homes, families didn't rely on a grocery store. They relied on a system they engineered themselves, and at the center of it was the hand-cranked mill. Whole grains chilled in galvanized steel bins or hefty wooden barrels, moisture-sealed for freshness. Forget decor. These bins were pure life insurance, packed with precious wheat. Rye, barley, oats, corn, grains that stayed good for ages, like forever food. Just keep them dry and whole. Nearby, the mill was bolted tight to a table, always on standby. Ready to roll instantly. No warm-up, no fuss. Just pure grinding power. Zero fuss. A few scoops of grain, a dash of muscle. Minutes later, boom. Family had raw stuff for bread, porridge, or soup. Once ground. Next stop, a wood-fired stove or brick oven, often a family DIY project. This three-part system, store, process, cook, ran on pure grit. No electricity needed, no fuel deliveries, no modern frills. This was wartime energy independence, old-school style. Grain, mill, fire. The ultimate survival recipe. No external infrastructure meant this whole setup laughed at weeks of blackouts. Rail disruptions, ration shortages. Families mastering this weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Many thrived, outshining neighbors, thanks to their DIY miniature food economy. Right at home. This was resilience before it became a buzzword. One tool, a universal food processor, way before that fancy term was even invented. This wasn't luxury, it was pure survival when shelves went bare. Families hit gardens, fields, forests, and the mill magically transformed their haul into the calories they desperately needed. For many, it was more than just gear. It became a promise. Got grain, got mill, we eat tomorrow. Picking a mill? Not a guessing game for these families. Back in the 30s and 40s, folks had zero tolerance for shoddy tools. No gambles. A tool that had quit on them? Nope. Their tests were simple, yet genius. First up, the heft test. A good wartime mill? Surprisingly chunky. Well-made cast iron felt solid. Tap it, and you'd get a deep, satisfying thud, not a ping. That sound spoke volumes. Real deal, not some flimsy knockoff. Time for the wiggle test. Adjustment screw? Smooth, firm resistance. No wobbly bits allowed. They'd spin the handle empty to spot any side-to-side shimmy. A tiny wiggle? Fine. A big shake? Uh-oh, bad alignment or shoddy work. Last check, burr plates. Even wear meant a long, happy grinding life. Chips or cracks? Stress, neglect, or just a bad pour. Lightweight aluminum mills? Straight to the note pile. Showed up later, but totally not built for wartime grind. They just warp or wear out. So, families took these tests very seriously. Their lives literally hung in the balance. This wasn't just tool shopping. It was picking a survival buddy. Next, restoration done right. Keep that cutting edge safe. Found an old mill in the barn? Hold up. Rushing a restoration often meant permanent damage. Good intentions ruined machines, and they never even knew it. The number one blunder? Polishing those wartime burrs? Big mistake. They weren't built for shine. Their power? Tiny ridges and angles. 1930s machining magic. Blast 'em or sharpen 'em hard. Poof, pattern's gone. Poof, high-performance mill becomes a pretty paperweight. Real restoration? Patience, my friend. Rusty bits got a spa day. Mild acid, usually vinegar or lemon. Gentle brass brushes, just enough to coax off the rust. No metal harm. Acid neutralized, parts bone dry. Families then fed the mill dry grain, lots of it. That grain polishing? It naturally realigned the burrs, way better than human hands. Outside bearings got a whisper of food-safe oil. Inside, dry as a bone, just as planned. Reassembled? It often ran like it was half its age. Zoom! This meticulous care? That's why these mills are still kicking today. Not delicate, just misunderstood. This tool, a wartime family hero. To grasp the hand-cranked mill's true power, just crunch the brutal numbers of wartime survival. Europe saw more civilian deaths from hunger than combat. Even in the U.S., even far from the front, rationing tightened its grip yearly. Sugar, canned goods, meat, even flour became a gamble. Stores weren't ever empty, but never full. Yet properly stored whole grains? They rarely let you down. Wheat berries last decades. Corn kernels? Edible long after modern packaged stuff goes bad. But without a mill, those grains were just a silent, unfulfilled promise. The mill unlocked that promise, transforming raw grain into essential survival food. Bread, gruel, gloop, and gut fillers. It made rations stretch like magic, turning one wheat sack into hundreds of healthy meals. And best of all, freedom. No more begging town mills, often jammed or just plain closed. Forget power, gas, or roads. No trucks needed. No permission slips needed, even when the world went sideways. The mill was their rock. Survival wasn't a prayer, it was a promise. They made it happen, hands-on. Now, let's see why fancy modern gear just doesn't cut it. Convenience makes us think new tech always wins, right? Even stuff from the 30s. But pit today's kitchen toys against a wartime mill and focus on toughness. The truth bombs are shocking. Blackout? Electric grinders are toast. Motors melt. Blades go blunt, plastic cracks. Hard corn or dry beans, they choke. Food processors, all about those wimpy blades and flimsy gears. One part breaks, it's landfill. And modern hand mills? Often flimsy aluminum or thin alloys. Pretty, sure, but not for grinding marathons. They're kitchen accessories, not workhorses, not family lifelines. The wartime mill, built like a tank. It scoffed at hardship, ate heavy grain for breakfast, and ran daily. No power needed. No spares, just a wipe down. It kept chugging long after everything else quit. Fuel's gone, motors are toast, and the lights? Nope. Fancy tech? Dead weight. That hand mill gets pricier by the minute. Forget nostalgia. This is engineering that still outsmarts modern ideas. 12 survival secrets from the past. We forgot them, but these old tools, they'll remind you. A deeper truth emerges, one the wartime generation just knew. Modern society misses the point. True grit isn't about gadget stockpiles. It's mastering simple systems that just work, no matter the chaos. The hand mill screams it. Durability trumps speed, always. Slow, human-powered, way more reliable than fast grid-dependent. And a family with grain, fire, and a trusty mill, they're eating better than any modern kitchen. Packed with electric gadgets. Oh, and it teaches us rhythm, too. Mill families didn't wait for disaster. They ground grain daily, like clockwork, a habit that kept them ready for anything. So when things went sideways, no panic. They just kept on keeping on. That steady, calm mindset. Quiet, self-sufficient vibe? Totally relevant for us today. Country or city apartment, doesn't matter. The principle's the same. Build systems that don't crash when one part fails. Choose tools you can actually fix. Learn skills that don't vanish with the power. Because when modern tech suddenly dies, the old ways, they just keep going. A historical gem still protecting us today. Hold one of these old mills, you're holding more than just metal. Behold, you're clutching the wisdom of folks who laughed in the face of impossible odds, crafting tools for keep going, not kick back. These gadgets, they worked because failure wasn't an option, and people literally bet their lives on them. Stumble upon one of these relics in a dusty barn, forgotten shed, or a grandma's attic sale. Don't you dare ignore it. You're staring at a family's dinner ticket when the lights went out and stayed out. When gas was a myth and nations played survival of the fittest with their own folks. It's basically a war hero, but the quiet doesn't need a medal kind. And it aced tests tougher than your Monday morning commute, trust me. Guess what? Its street cred hasn't dropped. Our world's still a bit of a whoopsie waiting to happen. We're basically balancing our food, power, and Netflix on a very long, very wobbly Jenga tower. But history whispers a secret. When the fancy stuff breaks, the keep it simple stupid stuff wins. Grain, a hand grinder, and a campfire? Boom. Dinner served. No Wi-Fi or gas station needed. No apps? No problem. Not saying ditch your phone, just know where your real save button is. It's about dusting off old skills and tools, so we're not just waiting for someone else to fix things. It's giving a high five to our ancestors' smarts, not just for old time's sake, but as a how-to guide for tough times. Next time someone brags about their prepper gear, gadgets, generators, battery packs galore, just remember, 100 years ago, families were basically MacGyvers with just their bare hands. Plus, good habits and a tool that just wouldn't quit, even when everything else threw a tantrum. Still here? Good. You get why this isn't just old news, right? History's not just bedtime stories, it's a cheat sheet. And some of the best survival hacks are the ones the world totally ghosted. If this old-school cool history clicks with you, hit subscribe on Historia Prime. We're not just rehashing ancient history. We safeguard the wisdom that once had our backs, and might again.